Late at night, a notification suddenly came to the young man's phone. A young man named Chen Yuan was looking at his phone and crying loudly because of a broken heart, continuing to look at his phone. Chen Yuan whined, looking at the message of his ex-girlfriend, who firmly suggested that he break up. After watering a few tears, Chen Yuan began to type a message at a very fast speed, asking his ex-girlfriend Tong Tong about what happened. Chen Yuan then asked if Tong Tong and his roommates had decided to play truth or dare. Chen Yuan in the messages begged Tong Tong not to do this to him, because the young man's feelings for this girl named Tong Tong are more than serious. After sending the tortured sticker, Chen Yuan began to ask his ex-girlfriend what he had done wrong and was he not good enough. Then Chen Yuan began to write a message saying that he had already planned their future. Chen Yuan's next message was that they would have a wonderful family in the form of 2 beautiful children, a car and a house. Chen Yuan assured Tong Tong that the young man would make every effort to bring this to life. Chen Yuan roared loudly, dripping with snot and tears, but continued to type. With the last message, Chen Yuan asked Tong Tong that it was really because he couldn't buy Tong Tong a handbag. After that, Chen Yuan said that he was saving money, so he would be able to buy a purse for Tong Tong next month when the scholarship came. However, this message has not been sent. Instead, Chen Yuan received a system notification that Tong Tong had restricted the number of people who could send her messages. It was also reported there that as soon as Tong Tong accepts Chen Yuan's request as a friend, they will be able to communicate. Seeing this, Chen Yuan howled that life is pain. Immediately, an excited roommate came up and loudly said that Brother Yuan seemed to be out of sorts today, covered in drops of cold sweat. That young man smiled faintly and asked Chen Yuan for forgiveness for disturbing him. Suddenly, Chen Yuan slammed his fist hard on the table and, dropping his chair out of anger and frustration, left the dorm room, slamming the door loudly. Chen Yuan's surprised roommates continued to stare at the door. One of them asked the other about whether Chen Yuan had been abandoned again, to which the second firmly replied that this was the 6th time this month. Chen Yuan's roommates were discussing the young man, and one of them even called Chen Yuan a stickler in the common people. Another agreed, adding that Chen Yuan had been chasing Shu Tong for 3 years. After some time, Chen Yuan and Shu Tong met. Shu Tong told Chen Yuan not to do that because people are watching, to which the excited Chen Yuan nervously smiled and turned to Shu Tong, telling her that he understands that Shu Tong is angry, but Chen Yuan bought her favorite fried pork. Chen Yuan begged Shu Tong not to talk about the breakup anymore. Chen Yuan noticed that if Shu Tong doesn't like something about him, then the girl can always say, and Chen Yuan will change. At this time, 2 girls standing nearby were discussing what one of them had heard about Chen Yuan working 4 jobs at once so that he could afford to give gifts to Shu Tong. Another girl asked what the result was in the end, because Shu Tong left Chen Yuan anyway. Shu Tong turned to Chen Yuan and said that she was not angry with him. Then, with a cautious tone in her voice, Shu Tong announced that her ex-boyfriend wanted to get back together with her. Shu Tong explained that after much thought, she came to the conclusion that she really needed that guy more. Chen Yuan frowned in shock and loudly asked Shu Tong about that former young man, calling him by his first name Huang Zhengkai. Then Chen Yuan began to ask about, but how? Chen Yuan stopped in mid-sentence and reminded Shu Tong that this Huang Zhengkai is still a bad person. Chen Yuan asked Shu Tong if she had forgotten how this Huang Zhengkai had deceived her. Chen Yuan, continuing to shout loudly, summed up by saying that Shu Tong is again letting Huang Zhengkai powder her brains. At this time, a Mercedes drove up, in which a smug Huang Zhengkai was sitting, telling Shu Tong to jump into the car. After opening the car door, Shu Tong turned to Chen Yuan and said that it was better for them not to meet again, as her boyfriend might misunderstand. After these words, the car immediately left. Chen Yuan, on the other hand, stood in place and watched the car with a sad look. After a certain period of time, Chen Yuan stood in the supermarket and irritably drank water, wondering to himself why no one appreciates sincerity. And is Chen Yuan so worthless that he can only suck up to everyone? Chen Yuan abruptly squeezed the plastic water bottle, privately deciding that there was nothing wrong with being courteous. Chen Yuan's eyes lit up with a bright red light, and the young man himself grinned, confidently deciding for himself that it was only necessary to do it properly and then Chen Yuan would become not a sycophant, but a Casanova. Suddenly, Chen Yuan heard a tinkling notification sound, and then froze when he saw a yellow system plate in front of him. On this plate there was a message that the strongest system of the stickler had identified a passing candidate for the role of host. The next system plate notified the young man that the connection was successfully completed. Also, suddenly, a system plate appeared above Chen Yuan's head with information about himself, which included his name, personal funds in the form of 230 yuan, as well as the fact that the young man does not have any reinforcements and the account of the stickler system in the amount of 90 quadrillion yuan. After reading all this information, Chen Yuan froze in shock, wondering if the clingy system was some kind of hack. Chen Yuan was interested in what this system allows you to do. When Chen Yuan saw the chest through the yellow translucent plate, he immediately pulled his hand towards it. However, a woman's scream was suddenly heard. The girl called Chen Yuan a pervert and asked about what he sees at all, what he does. Summing up, the girl screamed, telling Chen Yuan to watch his hands. Chen Yuan froze in horror and blushed, covered with drops of cold sweat. The disgruntled girl folded her hands in front of her and asked Chen Yuan about what he had been staring at from the very beginning. Then she said that Chen Yuan was definitely not right in the head. Chen Yuan carefully looked at this disgruntled girl and saw a system plate next to her, on which there was information that her name was Zhu Liu, age is 21, height is 165 centimeters, weight is 49 kilograms. It was also written there that the attractiveness index of Zhu Liu is 7 whole and 9/10 points, and the disposition towards the owner is minus 50 points. Chen Yuan froze, looking at this system plate in surprise. However, a second later, the young man saw another sign explaining that as soon as the location parameter reaches 96 points, it will be possible to make a counterattack, and Zhu Liu will become a fan of the owner Chen Yuan. Chen Yuan looked at this system plate in shock, asking himself a lot of questions, among which was how to use this system. About what, that is, Chen Yuan needs to spend this money on women. Most of all, Chen Yuan was surprised that he had as much as 90 quadrillion yuan on his account of the stickler system. Immediately after that, a system plate with the image of a black bank card appeared in front of my eyes, where the text was an explanation that all this amount is on that card, but only women can use it. It was also written there that when the user of the card becomes a fan of the owner, 1/10 of the amount spent will be credited to the owner's personal account and can be used at his request. In addition, the host can receive other rewards. Chen Yuan sighed, realizing now, this is how things are. Chen Yuan decided that then he could use this girl named Zhu Liu as a test mouse. Chen Yuan smiled slyly, but then abruptly changed his expression to a kinder one and spread his hands to the sides, addressing Zhu Liu as a beautiful lady and asking her not to be angry. Chen Yuan also noticed that whatever Zhu Liu wanted, today everything is at Chen Yuan's expense. Immediately after these words, a notification appeared in front of Chen Yuan's eyes that the implementation of the stickler system had been successfully completed. Zhu Liu, on the other hand, looked at the young man without expressing any emotions at all. Another notification appeared in front of Chen Yuan's eyes with the task that was Zhu Liu's counterattack. It was also written there that the reward for completing this task is 10% of system funds and 5 gain points. In addition, there was an explanation on the plate about the reinforcement points that can be used by the host to improve their characteristics. For example, physical characteristics, spiritual state, strength, agility, and so on. Suddenly, Zhu Liu arched an eyebrow and grinned, starting to inundate Chen Yuan with questions about how he pretends to be rich, just wants to show off in front of Zhu Liu and what the young man can really do. People around, at this time, looked at Zhu Liu, remembering that she is the first beauty of the Faculty of Arts. These people also said that they had heard that Zhu Liu was quite adept at spending other people's money, because somehow Zhu Liu only needed a couple of words for a man to spend 30,000 yuan on her. The people around concluded that this Chen Yuan seemed to have problems. Chen Yuan, at this time, grinned and told Zhu Liu not to rush into words, because isn't it true that if she doesn't try, she won't know? Zhu Liu smiled broadly and held out her phone with a QR code saying that today was such a good day. And then this girl asked the young man about why not treat all the classmates with sweets in the buffet, and whether Chen Yuan would help with the financial part of the issue. Zhu Liu thought to herself that Chen Yuan was dressed like a beggar, but trying to show off in front of a beauty. Zhu Liu privately decided that she would show Chen Yuan what a real shame is. However, at the same second, a notification came to Zhu Liu's phone that there was a receipt to the Alipay account in the amount of 50,000 yuan. Zhu Liu froze in complete shock. The people around froze in shock and immediately whispered that Chen Yuan just took and transferred 50,000 yuan, as if it didn't cost anything. Another person whispered that this young man looks as unremarkable as possible. And now it turns out that Chen Yuan is actually a major. Chen Yuan smiled and told Zhu Liu in a completely calm voice that 50,000 was not so much. Zhu Liu remained silent, trying to move away from the shock. Chen Yuan, on the other hand, handed over his phone with a QR code and, breaking into a wide smile, asked Zhu Liu if this was enough to get her WeChat. Zhu Liu blushed with surprise, wondering to herself that she had really made a mistake, and this young man was really a major. Zhu Liu smiled slyly and decided that if so, Zhu Liu immediately moved closer to Chen Yuan's phone and, with a smile on her face, told the young man that he could not worry, since Zhu Liu thinks that WeChat can be added. Chen Yuan's mouth dropped open in surprise. Zhu Liu moved almost close to the excited young man and said in a flirtatious voice that Chen Yuan would go to the same place with Zhu Liu first. The cunning Zhu Liu thought to herself that she was interested in seeing how long Chen Yuan would last. Approaching the luxury store called GUGOI, Zhu Liu said in a firm voice that she would like to clarify something first. Then Zhu Liu reported that she was not a mercantile girl at all, but just wanted to understand how sincere and serious Chen Yuan was towards Zhu Liu. Chen Yuan, listening to Zhu Liu, grinned and silently provoked the girl to spend money, since the more Zhu Liu spends, the more he will get back. Chen Yuan then told Zhu Liu in a completely calm voice that there was no problem, so the beautiful lady could choose whatever she liked. To himself, Chen Yuan, uttering the phrase "tame your appetite, my dears, and you will conquer human nature," thought that Zhu Liu is just a wonderful model for testing this system. After entering the store, Chen Yuan looked at all sorts of different bags. Suddenly, the young man heard a familiar voice asking Huang Zhengkai if this bag suits her. Turning around, Chen Yuan wondered in shock that it was Shu Tong. At that moment, Shu Tong turned her head to the side and looked at Chen Yuan in surprise. Chen Yuan froze in surprise, looking at his ex-girlfriend named Shu Tong. However, a pleased Zhu Liu suddenly appeared, who immediately asked Chen Yuan that Shu Tong was his ex-girlfriend. Immediately after that, Zhu Liu gasped, saying that she thought she was at the wrong time. Chen Yuan opened his mouth in surprise for a second, and then smiled slyly and said that no, on the contrary, it was very timely. Zhu Liu approached an employee of this store and immediately asked about whether they had a handbag from the spring show on sale. The shop worker smiled and said that the last one was left. However, the employee pointed her hand in the direction of Shu Tong and reported that another client is now trying on this handbag. Shu Tong cast a displeased glance in the direction of Chen Yuan, thinking to herself that the young man still wouldn't leave her alone. Then Shu Tong decided that now she would show Chen Yuan that a loser like him is not a rival to Brother Zhengkai. Coming out of her thoughts, Shu Tong smiled sweetly and called Brother Zhengkai, informing him that Shu Tong's birthday was coming soon. Shu Tong smiled sweetly and began to loom that same purse in front of Huang Zhengkai's eyes. Distracted from the screen of his phone, Huang Zhengkai asked about his birthday with a slight dissatisfaction, and then reminded Shu Tong that she had recently celebrated it, to which Shu Tong pouted her lips and announced that it was a birthday according to the lunar calendar, but it should be soon according to the solar calendar. Hearing this, Huang Zhengkai slightly furrowed his eyebrows, and then smiled irritably and asked Shu Tong to listen to him carefully. Then Huang Zhengkai reminded Shu Tong that she knows that a young man does not like mercantile girls. Smiling even more irritably, Huang Zhengkai asked Shu Tong about whether it was not that the girl was with the young man not only for money. Shu Tong froze in horror, covered with drops of cold sweat. However, at the same moment, Zhu Liu appeared, who snatched the same purse from Shu Tong's hands. Zhu Liu apologized, saying that if they didn't buy, Zhu Liu would take her for himself. Chen Yuan, meanwhile, received a system notification that he had received plus 20 points to Zhu Liu's favor with the young man, and when Chen Yuan paid for Zhu Liu's purse, he immediately received another notification that he had received another plus 20 points to Zhu Liu's favor with him. Zhu Liu giggled happily, clutching her brand new handbag to herself. Chen Yuan got another plus 20 points, holding that black card in his hand. Chen Yuan smiled slyly, thinking to himself that this is what it is, the true power of money. It's just some bag, and Chen Yuan already has 60 points. The young man suggested that at this rate, a couple more bags, and they will achieve the desired result. Slightly knitting his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose, Chen Yuan chuckled, believing that the cashback could, of course, be bigger. At this time, the shop workers were looking at the upset and embittered Shu Tong, discussing the situation in a whisper. One of the workers turned to another, calling her sister Zio Lai, and told her that she did not understand why people who look like they were born with a golden spoon in their mouth are so stingy towards their women, and those who look unremarkable are willing to spend such sums. To which Sister Zio Lai said that the store's director had told the workers many times that it was not necessary to be biased against guests, since appearance was deceptive. At this time, Zhu Liu glanced at the irritated Shu Tong and chuckled, saying that both the bag and the guy were taken by a better owner. Glancing at Chen Yuan, who was looking at one of the display cases with bags, Zhu Liu broke into a sly smile, privately deciding that such a big fish should not be missed. Immediately after that, Zhu Liu made her sweetest expression and grabbed Chen Yuan by the hand, calling him dear, thanked him for the bag, admiring that Chen Yuan is so generous. Chen Yuan froze in surprise. Shu Tong, at this time, could not stand it, with tears in her eyes, looked viciously in the direction of her former young man. After just a moment, Shu Tong walked up to Chen Yuan and abruptly shoved him in the chest, shouting that this was too much. Chen Yuan cast a sly glance at Shu Tong and smiled slightly, laughing inwardly at Shu Tong's words that it was too much. Chuckling, Chen Yuan silently addressed dear Lin Shu Tong, telling her that they had just started. When Lin Shu Tong began to run away from the store with tears in her eyes, and Huang Zhengkai ran after her, Chen Yuan received a system notification that a second object had been found. Immediately after that, Chen Yuan received detailed information from the system about the second object, namely Lin Shu Tong herself. In this system window, it was written that Lin Shu Tong's age is 21 years old, and height is 163 centimeters and weight is 49 kilograms. The attractiveness rating is 7 whole and 5/10 points. but the location to the owner is minus 10 points. The last system plate informed Chen Yuan that as soon as the location parameter reached 96 points, it would be possible to make a counterattack, and Lin Shutong would become a fan of Chen Yuan's master. In addition, the young man will receive a reward for performing this maneuver in the form of 10% of the system's bank and 20 gain points. Suddenly, Zhu Liu moved closer to Chen Yuan and asked the young man in a sly voice if he was having a little fun. Immediately after that, Zhu Liu announced that she was not averse to playing along. And then the beautiful lady clarified where they would go next. Chen Yuan repeated the question where, and then smiled slyly and confidently announced that they would, of course, go to spend money. Chen Yuan's eyes turned into a golden yuan symbol when the young man asked Zhu Liu that, would one purse be enough for her? Chen Yuan loudly exclaimed that he would never believe it. After some time, Chen Yuan and Zhu Liu arrived at another store. Chen Yuan pointed his index finger indiscriminately at various departments with things Zhu Liu liked. In the end, grinning, Chen Yuan handed over his bank card and said that apart from these two outfits, everything else should also be wrapped. A worker with clothes in her hands froze and opened her mouth in shock. And Zhu Liu looked in love at how the young man was paying for her purchases that even her eyes turned into hearts. The employee smiled and, turning to Mr. Chen Yuan, informed that they would pack everything and deliver the selected items to the address indicated by them. Listening to this, Zhu Liu, holding a bunch of packages in her hands, continued to exude a loving aura, thinking to herself that men with money are so attractive. Chen Yuan, at this time, received a notification from the system that he had received plus 5 points of Zhu Liu's affection for him. Zhu Liu and Chen Yuan then followed to the perfume shop. After Chen Yuan paid for Zhu Liu's choice with his card, he received a notification again that Chen Yuan received plus 5 Zhu Liu's favorability points. Immediately after that, Zhu Liu and Chen Yuan went to the cosmetics store. After a couple of moments, when Chen Yuan paid for the purchase again, he received plus 5 points of Zhu Liu's favorability. A few moments later, Chen Yuan and Zhu Liu were back in the clothing store, and when Chen Yuan put the bank card to the terminal again, he received plus 5 points. After a certain period of time, a blushing Zhu Liu sighed from fatigue and, smiling broadly, said that she thought that was enough. Catching her breath, Zhu Liu told Chen Yuan that if they continue to buy like this, Zhu Liu is afraid that all this will not fit into her apartment. Chen Yuan, hearing this, immediately reached into the phone and told Zhu Liu without emotion that this was not a problem, and Chen Yuan would buy Zhu Liu's apartment. While Chen Yuan was counting something on a calculator in his phone, adding up quite large amounts, Zhu Liu froze in horror, frightened by such a statement. Covered with drops of cold sweat, Zhu Liu became nervous and said in a trembling, uncertain voice that it was somehow not good, because Chen Yuan had already spent so much money, and this was only their first meeting. Zhu Liu smiled nervously and said that she just wanted to make a joke. At the same second, Chen Yuan received a notification from the system that Zhu Liu's disposition had dropped by minus 5 points. Chen Yuan rubbed his chin thoughtfully, privately concluding that the young man seemed to have scared Zhu Liu. After thinking a little, Chen Yuan made another conclusion that, indeed, if he was told that they would buy Chen Yuan a house worth several million yuan, then the young man would also experience some inconvenience. Suddenly, Chen Yuan moved closer to Zhu Liu and smiled, saying her name, and that Zhu Liu was studying in the 3rd year of the Art Institute. Then Chen Yuan reported that Zhu Liu is 21 years old. Her height is 165 centimeters, and her weight is 49 kilograms. In addition, Zhu Liu's favorite color is black. Zhu Liu froze in shock and blushed slightly, covering her mouth with her hand. Chen Yuan went on to say that Zhu Liu's favorite cuisine is Korean, and the girl's zodiac sign is Capricorn. In addition, Chen Yuan also said about the 37th size of Zhu Liu's shoes, and that she loves horror movies, but is most afraid of walking down the street alone at night. Summing up, Chen Yuan asked Zhu Liu a question about whether he would behave so recklessly if the young man did not like all this. Then Chen Yuan abruptly turned to the employee and asked if they had a participant savings card in the store. Chen Yuan then firmly replied that he would top up this card with 500,000 yuan. Summing up, Chen Yuan pointed his palm at Zhu Liu and told the employee the next time this girl, meaning Zhu Liu, comes to their store, recommend the best to her. The employee immediately agreed and politely asked the customers to wait a little. Chen Yuan, at this time, turned to Zhu Liu and said in a confident voice that this savings card was for her in order to smooth out the impression after an unsuccessful joke about buying an apartment, which scared Zhu Liu. Hearing this, Zhu Liu instantly melted and blushed deeply. Chen Yuan moved closer to Zhu Liu's ear and whispered the words that if Zhu Liu was uncomfortable, then the girl could offer Chen Yuan something interesting in return. Zhu Liu blushed even more and abruptly pushed Chen Yuan's face away with her hand, calling him a pervert. However, no matter what Zhu Liu said, Chen Yuan received a system notification that Zhu Liu's affection for him had increased by plus 30 points. Seeing all this, the shop workers admired Chen Yuan so much that even their eyes turned into hearts. The workers whispered loudly enough that this guy, Chen Yuan, was so plain in appearance, but so rich. Moreover, the workers noticed that Chen Yuan is not just rich, but also very generous, because the young man cares so much about his woman. Hearing all this whispering, Chen Yuan broke into a sly smile, thinking to himself that if you have money, no matter who you are, and no matter how you behave, they will forgive you and let you get away with it. Suddenly, Zhu Liu made a cute expression and said that Chen Yuan had bought her so many gifts, and then asked about why the young man should not think about himself. To which Chen Yuan spread his hands to the sides and briefly replied that there was no money. Zhu Liu smiled slyly and said that then it was her turn to give a gift to Chen Yuan. Zhu Liu thought to herself that if she wants to catch this big fish for a long time, then she should invest herself. After some time, Zhu Liu and Chen Yuan were already in another clothing store. Zhu Liu chose completely different clothes, choosing the right one for Chen Yuan. After choosing the right beautiful clothes, Zhu Liu took the young man to the barber shop, where Chen Yuan was neatly trimmed by the barber, following Zhu Liu's every instruction. After some time, Chen Yuan came out of the fitting room, completely transformed. Seeing the young man, Zhu Liu was clearly pleased, as Chen Yuan received a system notification that Zhu Liu's affection for him had increased by +5 points. Zhu Liu blushed deeply and covered her mouth with her hands, thinking to herself that Chen Yuan had become so attractive after the girl had only to dress up a young man a little. The worker standing behind Zhu Liu also froze at Chen Yuan's beauty and blushed deeply. Chen Yuan, meanwhile, received several more notifications that Zhu Liu's affection for him had increased by +5 points. Chen Yuan blushed slightly and got into a model pose, asking Zhu Liu about how she liked his outfit and whether this bow seemed a little strange. Zhu Liu was silent, admiring such an attractive young man. Chen Yuan thought to himself that he was already an adult, but this was the first time he had encountered something like this. Chen Yuan concluded that Chen Yuan did not have to spend money on it. Zhu Liu ran her index finger along Chen Yuan's chin and pierced the blushing young man with a flirtatious look, saying that there was nothing strange about this. Breaking into a flirtatious smile, Zhu Liu said that she thinks that now she and Chen Yuan look good together. Zhu Liu blew Chen Yuan a kiss and happily informed him that she was so happy today. Zhu Liu then thanked brother Chen Yuan, informing him that for a moment Zhu Liu even thought that she had fallen in love. When Zhu Liu and Chen Yuan said goodbye and went home, the young man received a system notification that Zhu Liu's affection for him had reached 68 points. When Chen Yuan entered his dorm room, he loudly informed his roommates that he was back. Hearing Chen Yuan's voice, his roommates froze in shock and opened their mouths. One of these roommates shouted loudly, calling on his god. Then he turned to brother Chen Yuan and asked about what the young man had been doing all day and what he was wearing. Chen Yuan, without taking his eyes off his phone, with a slight smile on his face, announced that he had been on a date with Zhu Liu. That young man put his hand to the side with displeasure and said with a questioning intonation that Chen Yuan had not decided anything with Lin Shutong, but had already taken up Zhu Liu. Pressing his glasses to the bridge of his nose, the second roommate reminded Chen Yuan that Zhu Liu is the first beauty in the Faculty of Arts. Addressing the old man Chen Yuan, the young man clarified about what would happen to Chen Yuan if he was abandoned again. Suddenly, another roommate put his hand on Chen Yuan's shoulder and with a smirk on his face said, "Listen to the brothers who say that this girl is not affordable for Chen Yuan." The young man was covered with drops of cold sweat and smiled weakly, saying words of gratitude to his roommates for their advice. After some time, Chen Yuan was looking at his phone at messages from Lin Shutong, who wrote that if Chen Yuan really hates Lin Shutong so much, then they should just delete each other from friends. Chen Yuan grinned as he looked at Lin Shutong's messages and concluded that, fortunately, these manipulations of Lin Shutong no longer work. However, if they remove each other from friends, then Chen Yuan will not be able to earn extra money on Lin Shutong. Coming out of these reflections, Chen Yuan sent Lin Shutong a question about whether he hated her. Chen Yuan then asked Lin Shutong about how she could talk like that. Chen Yuan reminded Lin Shutong that she also knows that she is special to Chen Yuan. To which Lin Shutong sent Chen Yuan a message saying that she was with Huang Zhengkai not because Lin Shutong needed his money, but because Lin Shutong's mother was ill and the girl needed 50,000 yuan for treatment. After seeing Lin Shutong's message, at the same second Chen Yuan transferred 50,000 yuan to the girl's account. Seeing this, Lin Shutong screamed in shock and surprise at the entire dormitory, not believing her eyes. With a strange arch of her eyebrows, Lin Shutong informed her roommates that she barely mentioned it and Chen Yuan immediately transferred the money. Hearing this, a surprised roommate came up to Lin Shutong and asked about who this rich man was, who was spreading out such money. That neighbor clarified that it was really Huang Zhengkai. Lin Shutong immediately furrowed her brows and said that to hell with Huang Zhengkai, because he couldn't even buy a simple bag for Lin Shutong. Then Lin Shutong said in an irritated voice that it was Chen Yuan who transferred the money to her. The surprised roommate opened her mouth and asked about Chen Yuan, clarifying that Lin Shutong had just broken up with him. The roommate froze, continuing to wonder that such a poor bastard as Chen Yuan really has such money. Lin Shutong furrowed her eyebrows and immediately began tapping her fingers on her smartphone, thinking that, really, it was her mistake. Lin Shutong decided that she needed to ask directly. Chen Yuan, at the same time, received a system notification that Lin Shutong's affection for him had increased by +5 points. Lin Shutong began to flood Chen Yuan with her messages. Lin Shutong asked Chen Yuan what all this meant. Then Lin Shutong began to ask Chen Yuan about where the young man got so much money, because today in the store. Lin Shutong immediately broke off and abruptly asked her ex-boyfriend in a message about their relationship with Zhu Liu. And then the girl clarified whether Chen Yuan had bought Zhu Liu's bag. After sending a surprised smiley face, Lin Shutong asked Chen Yuan one last question about whether Chen Yuan was really born with a golden spoon in his mouth after all. After being silent for a while, since Chen Yuan did not respond, Lin Shutong continued to write plaintive messages about wanting fried pork. After that, Lin Shutong sadly asked the young man that he didn't love her anymore. Pursing her lips, Lin Shutong continued to write to Chen Yuan without stopping. However, as soon as Chen Yuan saw as many as 15 unread messages, the young man immediately clicked on the chat settings and selected a button called Do Not Disturb. With a slight dissatisfaction, Chen Yuan looked away, thinking that Lin Shutong was too talkative, but Zhu Liu was not so hasty in this regard. Chen Yuan then turned back to his mobile phone, wondering where else he could spend a lot of money on a woman. After seeing the application icon with the image of a shark, Chen Yuan abruptly realized that he could try with live broadcasts. Having entered this program, Chen Yuan got on the air to a beautiful girl named Xiaomir, who with her sweet voice reported that she would be online for only an hour, so the fan brothers should hurry up with gifts. Chen Yuan entered the broadcast room under the nickname Lone Wolf and immediately began to read the comments, where many fans complimented Xiaomir. One of the commentators, with the nickname Mind, reported that his wife found out that he was watching Xiaomir's streams, and now they are getting divorced. The commentator Philin asked Xiaomir not to deceive his subscribers, while people with the nicknames Kakarot and Chicken were making copies. The lone wolf Chen Yuan wrote that he wanted to be Xiaomir's friend. Seeing Chen Yuan's comment, the Mind immediately asked the young man if it was funny to him that Chen Yuan was some kind of new name with such requests. The owl immediately warned the lone wolf Chen Yuan that it would cost him a pretty penny, since $1 million is far from the limit. Kakarot called Chen Yuan a fool and said that he would not throw 100,000. After that trio of commentators started laughing with the text. Looking at his mobile phone, Chen Yuan grinned, thinking to himself that more than $1 million is much more than a bag. Chen Yuan then selected a rocket from the many gifts and sent it to Xiaomir. The girl folded the heart gesture from her hands and thanked the lone wolf for the rocket. Xiaomir said words of love to the lone wolf, and then froze in shock and bulged her eyes. With her mouth slightly open, Xiaomir continued to stand and watch as a whole 100 missiles were sent to her. After seeing 100 missiles, those same commentators and Xiaomir herself froze in shock, realizing that these 100 missiles are equal to a whole 1 million yuan. A few moments later, the commentators began to write to the stream chat again. A commentator with the nickname Airplane wrote that Chen Yuan had spent a lot of money. That same Mind swore and said that they had a rich man here, and then he apologized and said that he was mistaken. Then a commentator with the nickname Charming appeared, who turned to Sugar Daddy and asked him to punish him. The last one was the same Kakarot who wrote that he was also nothing like that, so Chen Yuan could also pay him. Kakarot asked Chen Yuan to write him something. Continuing to read Xiaomir's stream chat, the young man concluded that these commentators are really snobs. Chen Yuan then smiled slyly and asked Xiaomir to let him please her a little more. Immediately after that, Chen Yuan began to poke his finger at the missiles again, choosing them in the amount of as many as 900 pieces. 1 moment later, Xiaomir received a notification that the lone wolf had pleased her with a rocket. Immediately after that, Xiaomir's entire screen was filled with those very missiles. A few moments later, an employee of the stream's office abruptly burst into his boss's office and shouted loudly that the incredible had happened. Bursting inside, that employee shouted to his boss the information that some unknown rich man had just unbuckled mere as much as 10 million yuan. Hearing this, that boss even spat out all the water he was drinking out of shock. Then this man made a serious expression on his face and asked the employee if he was a fraudster. To himself, this boss wondered in surprise that once as many as 10 million yuan, is it really money laundering? At this time, in the streamer's restroom, 3 girls were discussing something very loudly. One of these streamer girls blushed, shouting to the rest of her friends to go to her soon. Then this girl began to loudly inform the others that the idea of the young man was a lone wolf. The streamer clarified that this is the richest one, so all these girls should write to him soon. The other girls also blushed a lot from excitement. Another one of them started shouting that a lone wolf had transferred 10 million yuan to Xiaomir. Another girl said that a couple of such missiles would cover their monthly salary. Chen Yuan, at this time, was looking at his phone, seeing a bunch of friend requests from different girls. Xiaomir froze, covering her mouth with her hands. Xiaomir wondered to herself if this was a dream, and if she really had been paid 10 million yuan. Immediately after that, Xiaomir pinched her cheek hard and concluded that she felt pain. Suddenly, Xiaomir heard a rustling sound. Turning to the side, Xiaomir saw one of the workers with a sign in his hands, on which it was written that their boss said that it was necessary to take a lone wolf into circulation. There was also a red note on the sign that the boss was giving Xiaomir an extra 10%. Seeing this, Xiaomir chuckled to herself and smiled slyly, thinking to herself that she did not need to say this, because it was as if Xiaomir herself would have given such a large fish to others. Immediately after that, Xiaomir's face changed dramatically and winked at the camera, saying a big thank you to the lone wolf. Xiaomir smiled sweetly and told Lone Wolf to send her a message, and she would thank Chen Yuan properly. A few moments later, Chen Yuan received a personal message from Xiaomir herself, who addressed him as a brother and asked if he was here. With the next message, Xiaomir announced that her broadcast would last another 5 minutes. Not waiting for the young man's reply, Xiaomir sent a message again, but with a polite request to answer it. However, Chen Yuan himself was already sound asleep at that time, and muttered something to himself about not having his sister do this. The next day, some university students were looking at hot news, among which in the first place in the top was a story about a mysterious rich man who spent 10 million in a shark. It was also written there that the identity of this rich man still remains a mystery. In second place in the top were the daily discussions of Su Yu. In the third place in the top there was information that the auctioneer had put up the goods at a fabulous price. In the fourth and fifth place, there were already lesser-known articles about a walk in Tatapas and a complete review, but also about Uncle Gu, who managed to realize his dream. The students shouted to the others that others would rather look at the fact that someone had spent 10 million yuan in a shark yesterday. The same roommate with glasses for vision blurred from his dreams that so much money had been spent. This roommate of Chen Yuan said that in his city it would be possible to buy several apartments for such money. The roommate sighed admiringly, thinking that if only he had so much money. Chen Yuan opened his eyes, hearing all this conversation, and sighed. Another roommate, at this time, said that he hopes that today he will have a dream in which this young man will be the richest man. After some time, Chen Yuan was brushing his teeth and thinking hard about the fact that yesterday he spent so much money, and the system did not connect with Xiaomir. Chen Yuan continued to stare thoughtfully at the system plates with information about the related representatives of the fair sex, among whom there were only Zhu Liu and Lin Shutong. Poking at the shark app icon, Chen Yuan wondered if this really required a personal meeting and, that is, all the young man's money was wasted. Chen Yuan entered the list of dialogues and gasped in shock when he saw a lot of unread messages from different girls. One of them said hello, calling Chen Yuan a brother, and then reported that she was a cute little girl. After that, she asked if Chen Yuan would like to meet. The next girl introduced herself as Lang Yang and said that she was glad to meet. The third wrote her parameters, namely 19, 36, 172, and said that they would agree. After her, there was another girl who politely asked Chen Yuan to add her as a friend. The last one was Xiaomir herself, who sent plaintive emoticons and asked if Chen Yuan would confirm her friend request. Seeing all this, Chen Yuan was covered in drops of cold sweat from shock due to how many personal messages were sent to him. At this time, Chen Yuan's roommates were about to leave somewhere. One of them gasped with joy, saying that he was looking forward to it. The roommate with glasses began to hurry his friends, as all the good places will be sorted out. Upon hearing this, Chen Yuan turned around and called out to his roommates, asking them what they were doing and why they didn't invite Chen Yuan with them. The roommate turned around and informed them that, of course, they were going to class. Then that young man with a serious expression said that today is an open lesson, and these young people want to enjoy the beauty of Zhao Yuki. Adjusting his glasses, the second roommate began to talk about how Chen Yuan had run ahead of them before and did not want to leave after the lesson. The third roommate asked Chen Yuan about whether he was coming or not. Chen Yuan froze for a few moments, remembering Zhao Yuki's appearance. After a certain period of time, the young people came to an open lesson and looked at the same girl named Zhao Yuki. Zhao Yuki is the chairman of the Hunan University Student Union, and also the dream of all guys. In addition, Zhao Yuki plays the piano, is the chairman of the ballet troupe, and has a second class in fencing. It is the incredible appearance and many talents that make Zhao Yuki an elusive dream of all guys. Chen Yuan was thinking to himself that a Hunan University beauty named Zhao Yuki has been keeping to herself all this time, and no one has managed to conquer this Everest in 3 years of study. At this time, the girls who were sitting behind Chen Yuan were whispering very loudly. The first girl in love asked about who this handsome young man was, to which the second girl in love asked the question that Chen Yuan had transferred from another group, since this girl had not seen this handsome man before. Listening to all this, Chen Yuan grinned and kept thinking that since Zhao Yuki is so unapproachable, this is a great opportunity to get a good cash back. Lin Shutong and his roommate were also sitting behind. This roommate gasped, wondering aloud that it was Lai Chen Yuan and how he had changed so much in these couple of days. The last question that roommate had already asked Lin Shutong herself, asking her if Chen Yuan had dressed up so much in order to impress Lin Shutong herself. Lin Shutong froze in surprise, but then blushed and smiled shyly, agreeing with her roommate's words with uncertainty in her voice. Then a confused Lin Shutong reported that she also has Huang Zhengkai, and the girl is so worried that Huang Zhengkai and Chen Yuan will quarrel. Chen Yuan, at this time, received several system notifications that Lin Shutong's affection for him had increased by plus 10 points. Taking a glance back, Chen Yuan chuckled with displeasure, concluding that the young man had only to dress up, and Lin Shutong's attitude towards him improved. Chen Yuan believed that Lin Shutong was really a shallow woman. Chen Yuan then glanced at the system's nameplate, wondering to himself what, in any case, how he could add Zhao Yuki to the system. Suddenly, Chen Yuan heard a loud shout from one of the young men, who offered the other to show everyone how he would conquer the beautiful Zhao Yuki. Chen Yuan immediately froze in surprise, watching those young people. One of them leveled off and, with a grin on his face, told him to look carefully at the fact that now Zhao Yuki would fall in love with him completely and irrevocably. His friends, meanwhile, were happily provoking him, calling him boss and telling him to go ahead. This young man immediately approached Zhao Yuki and called her baby in a flirtatious voice, asking her to share her WeChat. Watching all this, Chen Yuan cursed with displeasure about the fact that the one that Chen Yuan had noticed was being taken away right before his eyes. Zhao Yuki froze in surprise. That young man grinned and began to move closer and closer to Zhao Yuki. However, suddenly that young man was called by an irritated girl who was sitting next to Zhao Yuki and asked about what that guy was doing. That young man completely ignored Zhao Yuki's girlfriend and continued to flirt with the girl, telling Zhao Yuki that they would get to know each other a little and start dating, and that young man did not have time to finish, as Zhao Yuki's exasperated girlfriend grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and pulled him in her direction, armed with a sharp pencil. That girl, whose name is Wu Xiaofei and who is Zhao Yuki's roommate, looked at that young man very irritably and, calling him a brat, asked about what he had done to himself. Making an even more vicious face, Wu Xiaofei firmly told Zhao Yuki not to touch them. That young man was covered with drops of cold sweat in horror and, casting a nervous glance at the sharp pencil in Xiaofei's hand, began to say in a trembling voice that this was a misunderstanding, and that young man just wanted to join the student union. Also, that young man in a nervous voice reminded Xiaofei that Zhao Yuki is the chairman, and this guy just wanted to ask for advice. Getting even more nervous, that young man said that Wu Xiaofei had misunderstood everything. However, a second later that young man was already wounded by that sharp pencil and howled in pain. Arching her eyebrows in anger, Wu Xiaofei said in an angry voice that she didn't think so. Wu Xiaofei also noticed that this was some kind of stupid excuse to pick up a girl. Wu Xiaofei then told that guy to get out of here. After finishing with that young man, an irritated Wu Xiaofei tested and said that it was even funny, citing as an example that it was like a toad flaunting in front of a swan. Zhao Yuki began to reassure her roommate Wu Xiaofei, assuring her that everything was fine. Wu Xiaofei continued to growl, saying that that young man had angered her. At this time, Chen Yuan approached Wu Xiaofei and Zhao Yuki. The young man smiled and turned to Zhao Yuki, telling her that he would also like to add her to WeChat. Wu Xiaofei, hearing this, growled in annoyance again, asking again that another one had come in, indignant about the fact that there is no end to these fans. Zhao Yuki froze in surprise, looking at Chen Yuan. The rest of the students immediately whispered, wondering what kind of hype it was today. Chen Yuan smiled and held out his phone with the QR code of WeChat, asking Zhao Yuki if it was possible. One of the students exclaimed in a whisper that this guy, referring to Chen Yuan, is so brave, as he is not at all afraid of losing face in front of the whole group. Another student wondered where Chen Yuan got such self-confidence from, and then he started talking about what must be lying. Wu Xiaofei, at this time, smiled and reported that this young man was at least prettier. With a chuckle, Wu Xiaofei asked Chen Yuan that the young man also wanted to join the student union. Chen Yuan spread his hands to the sides and smiled sweetly, informing that he was not very interested in all these student movements. Hearing this, Wu Xiaofei irritably folded her hands in front of her and asked Chen Yuan about what then he needed Zhao Yuki's WeChat for. Chen Yuan grinned and asked about that. Isn't it obvious? Chen Yuan then put on an innocent expression and announced that he wanted to hit on Zhao Yuki. Zhao Yuki blushed deeply and hesitantly pulled her hand towards Chen Yuan. Xiaofei, on the other hand, blushed deeply from anger. The students around started screaming in shock. wondering if Chen Yuan was seriously doing this. Some students shouted that Chen Yuan was crazy, and one of the students even offered to look at where Chen Yuan's confidence would be when the young man would cry after he was abandoned. Zhao Yuki, meanwhile, smiled slightly and took out her phone, agreeing to try to get to know Chen Yuan. Seeing all this, Lin Shutong pulled her eyebrows to the bridge of her nose in anger and pursed her lips. Her surprised roommate slightly opened her mouth and turned to Lin Shutong, asking the girl that, isn't Chen Yuan her personal dog? The roommate was genuinely perplexed, wondering aloud if Lin Shutong and Chen Yuan really had any problems. Chen Yuan, at this time, was grinning, thinking to himself that the desire for beauty is not alien to anyone, so why hide it? Behind Chen Yuan, there were 3 heartbroken young men who were crying because of Chen Yuan's success, and one of them began to sob loudly because his goddess Zhao Yuki would get this piglet named Chen Yuan. A young man was asking himself questions about who said that simplicity is bad, because sometimes the most obvious is also the most effective. Chen Yuan didn't understand who didn't like being paid attention to. When Zhao Yuki added Chen Yuan to WeChat, the young man immediately received a notification from the system that a new target had been found. The system also reported that Zhao Yuki's current disposition is 0 points. Chen Yuan smiled, rejoicing to himself that it had worked. After some time, the roommates turned to Chen Yuan's brother, telling him that he was in a good mood today, because the young man even managed to get Zhao Yuki's WeChat. One of these roommates even reported that Chen Yuan had changed quite a lot lately. Then one of the roommates, who is big, smiled and asked Chen Yuan if the young man would ask Zhao Yuki to introduce them to her beautiful girlfriends if everything worked out for Chen Yuan and Zhao Yuki. Chen Yuan blushed slightly and said in an embarrassed voice that he hadn't done anything yet. Then Chen Yuan said that Zhao Yuki is the most beautiful girl of the university, so these young people should not talk nonsense. Suddenly, someone called out to Chen Yuan, calling him a smug fool. Chen Yuan turned around and saw the same young man who unsuccessfully asked for Zhao Yuki's WeChat. Then this young man put his hands on his hips and told the boy Chen Yuan that he was smart. Chen Yuan grinned and asked those guys that they wanted to embarrass themselves even more, noting that these guys are professionals in this, that you can even learn. The roommates behind Chen Yuan froze in surprise. A large roommate asked about the fact that Chen Yuan is so self-confident that he even decided to start a war. The red-haired guy rubbed his chin with his hand, concluding that it looks like that. The roommate with glasses opened his mouth in surprise, wondering if there would be a fight now or not. That irritated young man immediately pounced on Chen Yuan, growling a question about what he had just said. Then that embittered young man began to shout that he was going to kill Chen Yuan. And after that he began to shout again the question of what Chen Yuan thought of himself. At this time, 2 of his friends were trying to restrain that young man in anger, shouting at him to calm down. And one of them, who grabbed that guy by the leg and asked at all that did that young man forget about what they were told at the police station, reminding that guy began to shout that if they fight again, they will be fined. Chen Yuan, looking at this, chuckled and said what a pity it was. Chen Yuan suddenly froze when he saw Zhu Liel in front of him. Turning to brother Chen Yuan, Zhu Liel said that the young man was so slow, and Zhu Liel had been waiting for him for so long. Seeing Zhu Liel, all the young people around went wild, repeating in unison the words that Zhu Liel is the first beauty of the Faculty of Arts, and Zhu Liel is the 6th in the ranking of beauties of the entire university, nicknamed the Thunderstorm of Heterosexuals. Chen Yuan, meanwhile, smiled slightly and said what a fool he was to make such a beauty wait. Then Chen Yuan tilted his head to one side and in a sweet voice announced that if Zhu Liel would allow him, then Chen Yuan would treat this beauty to dinner as an apology. Zhu Liel coquettishly pulled her hair back and smiled sweetly, saying that it was not worth doing this. Zhu Liel then turned to brother Chen Yuan in a flirtatious voice and asked if the young man liked the way she looked now. Zhu Liel also noticed that Chen Yuan bought her all these things. The young man replied that everything looks great on Zhu Liel, and this bag looks just awesome. Listening to all this, Lin Shutong was hiding in the crowd, who clenched her fists and pursed her lips from overflowing anger. Zhu Liel took Chen Yuan's arm and asked if it was true, and then said that people liked it too. Chen Yuan briefly replied that, of course, it was true, following with his eyes. That aggressive young man clenched his fist and began to sob, bursting into tears. The young man aloud reported that he did not understand at all what was wrong with him. However, the young man did not even have time to finish, as he heard a loud female scream that the girl sincerely does not understand. The girl was screaming loudly, asking about what was wrong with her. That young man looked sideways in surprise at the source of the scream, wondering if someone had really read his thoughts. Turning around, this young man saw Lin Shutong all in bitter tears, who loudly shouted the question why. Lin Shutong kept shouting that she had been Zhu Liel before. Lin Shutong genuinely didn't understand what was wrong with Zhu Liel. After a certain period of time, a joyful Zhu Liel turned to brother Chen Yuan and, holding out his portrait drawn in pencil, informed him that she had a gift for the young man. Chen Yuan carefully looked at the piece of paper where the portrait was drawn. Zhu Liu went on to say that she stayed up late in order to draft this gift. Slightly furrowing her brows, Zhu Liu pouted resentfully, informing Chen Yuan that if he threw away this drawing, Zhu Liu would not forgive him for it. Chen Yuan froze in shock, realizing to himself that this was the first gift from a girl in his entire life. Seeing this surprised expression on Chen Yuan's face, Zhu Liu smiled sweetly and asked if he liked it. Chen Yuan pursed his lips and then completely lowered his head down, addressing Zhu Liu in a stern tone and asking about whether it was all a bait. Chen Yuan concluded to himself that as soon as he spent a couple thousand yuan on her, Zhu Liu thought out in detail how to catch Chen Yuan. Casting a sly glance of his red eyes, Chen Yuan grinned and concluded to himself that, unfortunately, he was no longer the same as before. Zhu Liu was covered with drops of cold sweat from excitement, wondering to herself that Chen Yuan really didn't like the gift, since he doesn't look particularly happy. Chen Yuan, on the other hand, raised his eyebrows and asked Zhu Liu with slight disdain about why he needed it. Zhu Liu immediately became nervous and blushed deeply, saying in a trembling voice that she had painted this portrait late at night, and if Chen Yuan did not like it. Chen Yuan abruptly grabbed the portrait in his hands, and then moved almost close to Zhu Liu, looking straight into her eyes. Zhu Liu blushed even more, opening her mouth slightly. Chen Yuan grinned and asked Zhu Liu that if this was not the case, then how would Zhu Liu respond to the young man for all the gifts that he had given her? Snatching the drawing from Zhu Liu's hands, Chen Yuan smiled and raised his hand up. Confused, Zhu Liu began shouting at Chen Yuan, calling him a scoundrel, saying that he had scared her, and then ordered him to give her the drawing. Chen Yuan giggled, informing her that he would not give her the drawing. Chen Yuan then promised that he would take this portrait for himself and keep it as a family heirloom. Grabbing Zhu Liu by the wrist, Chen Yuan moved almost close to her again and addressed her by name, informing her that, of course, Chen Yuan likes Zhu Liu herself more than her gift. Hearing this, Zhu Liu froze in shock and blushed even more. Zhu Liu then looked away and cursed to herself, concluding that Chen Yuan was flirting well. At the same moment, Chen Yuan received a notification from the system that Zhu Liu's affection for him had increased by +5 points. Seeing this notification, Chen Yuan smiled eerily, silently asking Zhu Liu that she wanted to tease him. Then Chen Yuan also privately addressed Zhu Liu, calling her dear, and said that Chen Yuan needed her only so that the young man would have more money. Suddenly, a young man appeared who shouted Zhu Liu's name and abruptly pushed Chen Yuan aside, standing between them. Then this young man called Zhu Liu by name again and abruptly asked a question about what, hadn't she agreed with her best friend to do nails? Then this young man began to irritably ask Zhu Liu about who this man was, referring to Chen Yuan. Clenching his fists, that young man began to irritably and nervously assume that Zhu Liu and Chen Yuan were doing nails, and now they are making out in front of everyone, pointing his index finger in the direction of the surprised Chen Yuan. That young man began to inundate Zhu Liu with various questions about the fact that Chen Yuan has money, and that is why Zhu Liu allows himself to be hugged. Pulling his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose, that young man began to shout that he had been competing for Zhu Liu for so long, and this beautiful girl had never even allowed herself to be taken by the hand. Chen Yuan raised his eyebrows and sighed, privately concluding that apparently this boy is an ardent fan of Zhu Liu. Chen Yuan reflected that this kind of behavior was very familiar to him. Filled with anger and irritated, Zhu Liu shouted loudly at this boy with glasses, asking him about who he was in general. Then Zhu Liu, in anger, began to ask about what business this boy had, whether Zhu Liu had a partner or not. At the same moment, Chen Yuan walked up to that young man and politely greeted him, introducing himself by his real name. Chen Yuan then smiled slightly and asked what this young man's name was, and how long he had been humiliated like this. Zhu Liu, at this time, arched her eyebrows in surprise, completely not understanding what was going on here at all. The young man with glasses clenched his fist and announced in a trembling, uncertain voice that his name was Wang Yu. After that, Wang Yu announced that he was also a student of the Faculty of Arts, and also that Wang Yu had been trying to take care of Zhu Liu for 6 months. After hearing this, Chen Yuan sighed heavily, realizing that this was a lost child. Pushing his hair back with his hand, Chen Yuan chuckled, saying that this reminds him of someone, because once Chen Yuan ran after a girl for 3 years. After that, Chen Yuan told Wang Yu that the young man used to work 4 jobs, and 8 sunsets and steamed buns. Wang Yu's eyes bulged and froze in surprise. Slightly raising his eyebrows, Chen Yuan smiled faintly and reported that, in the end, this girl still preferred to get into someone else's Mercedes. Drawing his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose, Wang Yu asked in surprise about how, because this is already too much. However, Chen Yuan moved closer to Wang Yu almost closely and said that therefore those who abandon the likes of Wang Yu and Chen Yuan motivate them to become better. Placing his hand on Wang Yu's shoulder, Chen Yuan said that a real man would definitely have a decent woman. Then Chen Yuan abruptly leveled off and pointed his hand to the side, telling Wang Yu in a confident voice to go back to his dorm and forget about Zhu Liu. Chen Yuan also noted that when Wang Yu succeeds, Zhu Liu will definitely see it and regret his choice. Tears flowed from Wang Yu's eyes in streams. And the young man himself clenched his fists and turned to his brother Chen Yuan with admiration, informing him that he had calmed him down. Wang Yu admiringly promised that he would definitely become stronger and earn a lot of money. Zhu Liu, meanwhile, smiled nervously, wondering to herself what was going on here at all, and was Wang Yu really crying? Then an excited Zhu Liu turned to her brother Chen Yuan and reported that Wang Yu was just her friend, and Zhu Liu herself never thought that. Shen Yuan cast a stern look at Zhu Liu and called her by name, saying in a cold tone in his voice that the young man did not care about this girl's past. Then Chen Yuan abruptly tore Zhu Liu's drawing in half and said in a firm voice that he thought Zhu Liu did not respect himself or Chen Yuan himself. After tearing the gift portrait into small pieces and throwing it into the sky, Chen Yuan informed Zhu Liu that the girl could continue using the savings card that Chen Yuan gave Zhu Liu yesterday. Turning on his heels, Chen Yuan began to leave, throwing this girl the last words that, however, until Zhu Liu understands his surroundings and learns to communicate with people, it is better not to see them. As he left, Chen Yuan smiled slyly, wondering to himself how Zhu Liu was going to put up with such an attitude towards himself and what this girl would do. Chen Yuan smiled, thinking to himself that he was looking forward to it. A large drop fell to the ground. Recalling the moments from the past spent together with Chen Yuan, Zhu Liu thought that for the first time someone was so condescending to her. Shedding bitter tears, Zhu Liu cried loudly and howled in a trembling voice that Chen Yuan really liked her, but she had screwed up so much. However, at the same time, Chen Yuan received a notification from the system that Zhu Liu's affection for him had increased by +5 points. Chen Yuan chuckled to himself, concluding that apparently the worse you treat a woman, the more she loves you. Chen Yuan confidently realized that he had grown up. Then the young man chuckled, deciding that he was done with Zhu Liu, so it was time to get down to Zhao Yuki. Picking up his phone, Chen Yuan gasped when he saw that Zhao Yuki was broadcasting live. Chen Yuan wondered if Zhao Yuki was a streamer. Chen Yuan immediately went on the live broadcast, which was hosted by Zhao Yuki. As soon as the broadcast loaded, Chen Yuan saw Zhao Yuki wave her hand to her fans and greet them. Zhao Yuki then introduced herself as Kiki and announced that her specialty was music and dancing. Zhao Yuki then announced that she is still learning how to interact with fans on this platform, so she asks them to take care of her. Chen Yuan stared intently at the screen of his phone and even blushed slightly, thinking that it was cute. Chen Yuan also wondered if it could be that Zhao Yuki only looks so cold, but in fact this girl is quite open. Sighing, Chen Yuan gasped in surprise when he saw that only 314 people out of 700 and something subscribers were watching the live broadcast. Chen Yuan genuinely didn't understand why there were so few people. Chen Yuan thought that wouldn't do. At the same moment, Chen Yuan received a joyful message from Xiaomir that the lone wolf was back online. Xiaomir then sent a smiley face with a kiss and said that she was glad to see Chen Yuan. Chen Yuan gasped, and then asked Xiaomir about who she was. Xiaomir gasped and turned to her brother Chen Yuan, reminding him that he had just given Xiaomir a bunch of rockets yesterday, and today he no longer remembers. Chen Yuan sent a message back with a loud laugh, saying that he was just joking. Chen Yuan then asked Xiaomir if she had any free time, and then informed her that they needed to meet. Xiaomir gasped in response, talking about how impatient Chen Yuan was. Immediately after that, Xiaomir reported that she was very busy for the time being. Chen Yuan told Xiaomir to forget about it in that case, to which Xiaomir told brother Chen Yuan not to be angry, promising that Xiaomir would dance for him today. At this time, Chen Yuan was twisted with annoyance when the young man realized that Xiaomir still wanted to breed him for money. Chen Yuan spent so much money, but until now there was not even a system notification about the connection with this Xiaomir. Chen Yuan thought it would be better if he gave all this money to Chairman Zhao Yuki. Suddenly, Chen Yuan received a notification from the application that the presenter, whom the young man is following, is participating in the battle. After looking closely, Chen Yuan saw that the application was asking a young man to support the presenter with the nickname Baby Kiki. Suddenly surprised, Zhao Yuki froze when she saw that she was about to participate in a battle with someone. At this time, the excited Wu Xiaofei gasped, surprised by this battle. Wu Xiaofei sincerely hoped that this battle would not be with some big shot. Chen Yuan, at this time, smiled sweetly when he saw that this battle would be with Chairman Zhao Yuki. Chen Yuan thought that this battle would be interesting to watch. Suddenly, the same Xiaomir appeared in front of Chen Yuan's eyes, who, with a sweet smile on her face, announced that she had accidentally called a new girl to the battle. With an innocent expression on her face, Xiaomir believed that victory was in her pocket. Fascinated, commentators with nicknames Razum and Philin continued to write the same thing as on the last broadcast, discussing wives and divorces, as well as how beautiful Xiaomir is. Chen Yuan, seeing this, grinned maliciously and reported that it was quite difficult to predict the winner here. Chen Yuan thought that Xiaomir and Zhao Yuki were quite an interesting set of circumstances. Xiaomir began to attract attention to herself with the words that she thinks that little Kiki should not even try, because Xiaomir's viewers are much better than her. Xiaomir added that moreover, she is supported by such an influential person as a lone wolf. Immediately, the audience became more active in the comments. A commentator with the nickname Little Archie asked about the lone wolf, clarifying that this is the one who spent 10 million yuan yesterday. The viewer with the nickname Jimmy immediately asked questions about the fact that this is the main tycoon, and whether Xiaomir has already tamed. The Midnight viewer simply agreed with Xiaomir's words. Liu Daning apologized to little Kiki, saying that Xiaomir has such wonderful big eyes, and he is now for her. Recalling the dialogue with Chen Yuan about the live meeting, Xiaomir grinned, concluding to herself that according to her experience of catching large fish, Chen Yuan must already be on the hook. Seeing the huge gift rocket, Xiaomir immediately made a flirtatious expression on her face and, turning to the lone wolf, thanked her brother. However, after just a moment, Xiaomir froze with horror when she saw that the missiles were not sent to her, but to Zhao Yuki. Frowning her brows, Xiaomir shouted a question in shock about why. Seeing that the lone wolf sent baby Kiki 1,000 missiles, Zhao Yuki immediately blushed and opened her mouth in shock. Wu Xiaofei, on the other hand, shouted in shock that a whole 1,000 missiles was simply incredible. Biting her lip, Xiaomir made an evil expression, wondering why the lone wolf didn't send this 1,000 missiles to her. Suddenly, Xiaomir heard a rustling sound and turned around to see an excited sweaty worker with a sign in his hands. On this plate, it was written that the boss was demanding an explanation from Xiaomir. Excited, Xiaomir turned to the camera and apologized to her brother viewers, saying that Xiaomir had things to do, so she had to run. A second later, the image of a coffee cup and the inscription that the streamer is resting appeared on the screen. Jimmy's commenter sent a text laugh and said what a shame it was. Little Archie also wrote that the lone wolf is really incredible, as he forced Xiaomir to close his mouth. Liu Daning also wrote that Xiaomir said that the lone wolf was her patron, and the young man himself immediately started another one. Chen Yuan, at this time, was looking at his phone and grinning, thinking to himself that he could give gifts to both Xiaomir and the other. Turning to Xiaomir in his mind, Chen Yuan asked her if she really wanted to play with a young man. Considering how Zhao Yuki continues to conduct his stream, Chen Yuan addressed her as Chairman Zhao and said that he had spent a lot of money, so Zhao Yuki should not disappoint Chen Yuan. After a certain period of time, the shark employee again burst into his boss's office, shouting that something terrible had happened. That employee was shouting and waving his hands, reporting that this rich man with the nickname Lone Wolf, covered with drops of cold sweat. The boss abruptly jumped up from his seat and asked that Chen Yuan had stolen 10 million yuan again, and then began to shout the question that this guy was definitely not what some oil tycoon. At that time, in the streamer's restroom, the girl was screaming loudly from shock that the richest lone wolf had transferred 10 million yuan to the girl who played the piano. The two girls around her were looking at her phone screen in shock. One of these streamers asked in surprise that the lone wolf was in a musical mood today. Another girl turned to her colleague named Xiao Lai and told her to carry her triangle. Another of these girls turned to Xiao Lai and asked to capture her son, too. After a certain period of time, Zhao Yuki watched the news on the site, seeing in the top of the hottest news that the mysterious rich man had again stolen 10 million yuan, and therefore the new presenter is now number 1 in the ranking. Wu Xiaofei was shouting loudly, addressing Kiki and telling her to look at the fact that today's broadcast of Zhao Yuki is in the first place in all trends. A joyful Wu Xiaofei shouted that Zhao Yuki had become popular and would now be an internet celebrity. Zhao Yuki opened her mouth in shock again and blushed deeply. However, suddenly Zhao Yuki put on a serious expression and made a dissatisfied noise about the possibility of becoming an internet celebrity. Zhao Yuki asked a question into the void about what really makes men happy on the internet. Zhao Yuki summed it up, saying that she would not say that this is a particularly attractive prospect. Zhao Yuki then asked Xiaofei if she understood that a career is the most important thing for a woman. Zhao Yuki believed that a woman should be independent, both financially and in all other aspects, to which Wu Xiaofei smiled and told her to stop lecturing her. Then Wu Xiaofei smiled slyly and asked Zhao Yuki to tell honestly if the girl knew this rich man that showered her with gifts, to which Zhao Yuki turned aside and shouted the words that she had already said 1,000 times that she did not, and if Wu Xiaofei did not want to, then let her not believe. Wu Xiaofei got a little nervous and asked Zhao Yuki not to be angry, since Wu Xiaofei is just very curious. Zhao Yuki made a satisfied expression again and said that this lone wolf really sent her too many gifts. Zhao Yuki decided that she needed to thank him. Xiaofei, removing the circular lamp, was covered with drops of cold sweat, amazed at Zhao Yuki's abrupt change of mood. Privately worried, Wu Xiaofei wondered who had just said that he was not amused by such a prospect, because Zhao Yuki said one thing and did another. Suddenly, Zhao Yuki screamed loudly, thereby greatly frightening Wu Xiaofei. Smiling nervously, Wu Xiaofei asked what happened. Zhao Yuki turned to Wu Xiaofei and said that she might know who it was. Looking closely at Chen Yuan's WeChat, the girls saw that his nickname was Lone Wolf. In a voice trembling with surprise, Zhao Yuki said that it seemed to be Chen Yuan.